This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below.
The game and how we talk about the NFL is so offensive minded that I feel like it's not accurate how we talk about the NFL and what leads to success. We all know the number one thing a team can have to cover up all its flaws, all of its mistakes. The number one thing you can have, we all know, is a good quarterback. Like if you have a great quarterback, a lot of issues just don't matter, right? For the longest time, those issues that they had in Kansas City, they did not matter. And let's keep it a buck, they still 9-5, right? Like it's not like they're a bad team. They're just not as dominant as they used to be. And they have the worst wide receiver room in the NFL. But it doesn't really matter as much as it would matter to other teams simply because you had Pat Mahomes. Quarterback covers up a ton of flaws. That's why quarterback gets hyped as much, because elite quarterbacking covers up a ton of flaws. Regular quarterbacking is regular quarterbacking, but elite quarterback play covers up flaws. Allows you to get away with things on offense. Allows you to get away with a lack of talent on the offense. That's what elite quarterbacking does. We all know this. And that's why you will find nobody who doesn't appreciate the quarterback position. But when we think about what you can do to cover up a lot of flaws on your team, if your quarterback is not elite, we don't necessarily go to the right place. Sometimes we go and say, hey, if your quarterback isn't great, you know what can have a similar effect? Wide receiver. Let's throw money at wide receiver or running back. People don't throw money at running back, but they throw resources at it to get a good one, right? Or offensive line. And while having a great offensive line will cover up some flaws, where having a good wide receiver will elevate some quarterbacks, where having a great running back will cover up some flaws, nothing compares to the amount of flaws a great defense can allow you to get away with. See, when we're talking about an elite quarterback and what that does for your team, what we're really talking about is the widening of your margin of error. You have an incredible margin of error when you have a great quarterback. We've seen it with the Bengals and Joe Burrow. We see it with Lamar in Baltimore. You have an incredible margin of error with an elite quarterback. And something similar is true when you have an elite defense. If you don't believe me, I'm going to use two examples. The Philadelphia Eagles last year, the Philadelphia Eagles this year, the Cleveland Browns this year, obviously. And the Cleveland Browns last year, hell, let's use them as well. In 2022, the Philadelphia Eagles had the best defensive line in football. They were number 2 in pressure percentage. They were number 1 in sacks. They had like 70 sacks and a ridiculous number of production from them. And it allowed the Eagles to get away with a lot, right? It allowed the Eagles to get away with corners that necessarily, like, they had name value, but they weren't as good as the name value suggested. Right, like Darius Slay's really good, but there's some questions about those other corners, albeit big name corners, but there's some questions about them. Allowed you to get away with questionable linebacker play at times. It allowed you to get away with inconsistent quarterback play. Right, Jalen Hurts was playing well, much more consistent than he was this year, but still a bit inconsistent. But you had a great defense that gave you a large margin for error. You were allowed to get away with it. This year, that Philadelphia Eagles defense regressed just a little bit. They're just not as good on the defensive line. They went from 2 to 12 in pressure percentage. They went from 1 to like 8 or 9 in total sacks. They've regressed. They're not as dominant. That defensive line is not as dominant. And see, the Philadelphia Eagles made the mistake that everybody made. When your team has success, let's make it about the quarterback. No matter what it's telling you, let's make it about the quarterback. When it wasn't really about the quarterback to begin with. Now, Jalen Hurts did his thing. He played well. But the reason Jalen Hurts was afforded so many opportunities to play well was because of the margin of error that defense gave him. You take away that elite margin of error that defense has, and now you look at Jalen Hurts and you're like, man, he turns the ball over a lot. Man, he really don't be consistent all like that. Like, you start to see the flaws. You start to see the flaws in the corners. Like, oh man, they don't really cover that well, do they? Right? And it's simply because instead of Javon Hargraves, instead of having this elite defensive line, you have a very good one, but not an elite one. Let's go to Cleveland. 2021. Browns had a similar roster than what they had now. Now, where the roster changed was on the defensive line. Till 2021, outside of Myles Garrett, might have had the worst defensive line in football. And since you had that, you weren't getting away with any room for error when it came from the secondary. Denzel Ward messes up one time, it don't matter. Well, Denzel Ward only messes up one time, it matters. Right? Like, Denzel Ward let somebody slip by, John Johnson not paying attention here, linebacker not in the right spot here. It all matters because the defensive line is not there, not giving you that margin of error. Then you look at this year. Now, when I watch the film, I still see plays where Denzel Ward kind of falls asleep in cover two. I still see plays where guys get wide open, but they don't get completed as much because the defensive line is there, affecting the throw. Same thing goes for the offense. Last year, Jacoby Brissett was playing really well, not turning the ball over, scoring a lot of on his drives, had a high scoring percentage, moved the ball well, played very well for those 11 games. It didn't matter because the defense gave you no margin of error. Right? Like, Jacoby Brissett could not mess up once in order to win. It's not sustainable. Fast forward to this year, Joe Flacco can throw 3 interceptions in a game, 2 of them virtually pick sixes. Browns still find a way to win. The Browns can start PJ Walker versus the San Francisco 49ers. Browns can win. Browns can throw a pick 6 at the beginning of the Baltimore Ravens game. And they still find a way to win on the road. The difference is that the defensive line for the Cleveland Browns affords you that margin of error. Because when a defensive line is performing on all cylinders like this, what that means for everybody is that they're asked to do less. Since you have this defensive line, the corners, they don't have to hold up for 4 seconds. They just have to hold up for 2.5. You're asking less out of your corners, and your corners are already really, really good. Since you have this defensive line, you're not asking your linebackers to do more than what they want to do, which is crash some gaps and get back downhill, make some tackles. Last year, you were asking them to do a lot, take on guards, all this shit. This year, nah, just come down. Your safeties legitimately just got to hold up for 1 or 2 plays, right? Maybe 3 on a bad day. But if you hold up for those 3 plays, you're good. Just make 1 play. That's all we asking all the safeties to do. Make collectively 1-2 plays a game. You can flip to the offensive side of the ball because the defense gets so many 3 and outs, because the defense allows you so many possessions on offense, because the defense allows you so much leeway on offense, because you don't have to score every drive, because the score is always going to be kept low. The offense is asked for significantly less. The reason the Browns have been able to get away with Joe Flacco, with DTR, with PJ Walker, with Deshaun Watson up and down play, the reason the Browns have been able to get away with this, and if this defensive line continues to hold up, will continue to get away with this, is because all this Browns defense asks from the quarterback position, give me 2 or 3 drives. If you turn it over a bunch of times, you got to give me 3. But if you don't turn the ball over, if you simply just go 3 and out and maybe hold on to the ball, get an even time of possession, all I really need you to do is have 2 good drives. Just 2. If you don't turn the ball over, that's all I'm asking. If you don't make your own problems, all I'm asking you is for 2 good drives. Now, quarterback's hard. It's hard to get 5 good drives in a game. It's hard to get 6 good drives in a game, or 8. But if you're only asked to get 2, all of a sudden the bar for accomplishing that gets so low that you can accomplish it with 4 different quarterbacks. We often talk about the quarterback position in this reverence of how that position can just make your margin of error so wide. But we don't often do it with dominant defensive lines. But the same thing is true. The Cleveland Browns are able to get away with all these injuries on offense because of the defense, because of the defensive line. Think about it this way. This is only surprising because it's happening on the defensive line. If this were in reverse and the Browns defense was decimated, but let's say they had Patrick Mahomes at quarterback, nobody would be surprised that the Browns are 9-5. Everybody would be like, yeah, well, that makes sense. They still got Mahomes. They still got Kelsey, all this stuff, right? That makes sense. And let's just say it's the Tyreek Hill version of it, right? Like, let's say you had Tyreek Hill, Mahomes, Kelsey, all that stuff on the offensive side of the ball, hypothetically, for the Cleveland Browns. But your defense was decimated, like the Browns' offense is decimated right now. Nobody would be surprised that this team is 9-5. But when the opposite is true, it's a shock. It's because we don't value the defensive side of the ball enough. And the truth is, when you're dominant on that side of the football, it's almost as valuable as having a franchise quarterback, because it allows you to get away with not having one. Look at the 2015 Denver Broncos. They did not have a franchise quarterback. They had the shadows of a franchise quarterback in Peyton Manning. But you know what? All they needed Peyton Manning to do, 2 drives. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the year they won the Super Bowl in 2020. All they needed Tom to do, 2-3 drives. You give us that time, we good. We straight. All I need you and Mike Evans, just 2-3 drives, we're good. It could be but in between. Just give us them 3 drives, Tom. We good. Nick Foles, 2 or 3 drives. See, that's what a dominant defense does. And that's not discouraging anybody who I mentioned or anybody on this Browns team that's played quarterback. I want to make that clear. Just because I don't think that and I'm not going to hype them up to the moon, doesn't mean that I'm not encouraged by what I've seen. But also we have to understand the context in which it's happening, which is the defense is allowing such a margin of error that only elite defenses allow. Right? You wonder how Trent Dilfer wins the Super Bowl. You wonder how Nick Foles wins the Super Bowl. You wonder how all of this stuff happens. It's because the defense allows you a margin of error. It allows you to get away with only having 2 or 3 good drives on offense, because it's all you gotta do. The same way a great quarterback only acts as a defense to stop the other team 1 or 2 times. You see what I mean here? Browns have a defensive line that's giving them a margin of error. We saw this with Philly. We saw what happened the second Philly couldn't maintain that and went down. We love to make things about the quarterback position, and for good reason, because elite quarterbacks do make that much of a difference, more of a difference than an elite defense. But if that quarterback is not elite, then you got to look at stuff like this, right? Then you got to look for that margin of error in different places. We see Miami look for it in speed, in Tyreek Hill. The Browns have found their margin of error in defense. And that is the key to the Browns' success. It's the defense gives you this massive margin of error. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.